Good evening, everybody. My name is Gene Lucas. I have the pleasure of serving as the president of the UC Santa Barbara Alumni Association. True honor to welcome you, our alumni and our community members, to tonight's event, Lessons About Aging from Living with Hunter-Gatherers, the fourth installment in our six-part Aging and Longevity series. We're thrilled that this is the fourth installment at a time of Aging and Longevity series and take place during our All Gaucho reunion this weekend. And I hope that all of you, or at least some of you, will join us for other events taking place throughout the weekend on our campus. On behalf of UC Santa Barbara alumni, I would like to offer my thanks for the expertise of the family in the Center for Aging and Longevity Studies and the leadership and collaboration of Dr. Nicole Albada, Diane Thomas, Dr. Joel Rothman, UCSB Development, Direct Relief for the use of their facility here this evening, and the Santa Barbara Independent. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Joel Rothman, Director and Founder of the Center for Aging and Longevity Studies, who will introduce tonight's speaker. And I will say that every time I see Joel, he looks a little younger for some reason. That's hardly true.
Sadly, that is hardly true. Gene was extremely modest, but Gene was the Gene ran the University of California, Santa Barbara, as most of you know, for how long? 20-something years. Yes, so a long time, and did an absolutely fabulous job. And I was very fortunate to have Gene as the Executive Vice Chancellor when I started here and through the many years. So thank you for your service and continuing service. He can't give it up. So I guess my first slides were to thank the people that Gene just thanked, but I'm going to go ahead and show their faces. So yeah, closer yet. Wow, I have to practically swallow the thing. Okay, and we have no control over the volume. Okay, is the Zoom recording going? Okay, we need to thank as well Julie Mickleberry, particularly on behalf of the UCSB Santa Barbara alumni, who initiated the idea for this series with Nicole many months ago, and Samantha Putnam also in the Alumni Affairs. I can't say enough about Nicole, who has done so much to advance the Center for Aging and Longevity Studies during its inauguration, the last 3.5 years that it's been around, creating the website, organizing these events. She has done so much more, and none of that is required of her job as a professor at the University of California. So it's been fantastic. And Diana Thomas, who's also here, has helped us so much, and also an alum, by the way. So thank you to those. And also, again, we have to thank Direct Relief, particularly Martha Vasquez, who's helped provide this beautiful setting for gratis, I will say, for these events, and the Santa Barbara Independent. So it's been a privilege of mine to establish the Center for Aging and Longevity Studies, and many of you may have heard me talk in the first of the 6 lectures about why I did that and why it's really, really growing and is a really exciting time in the science. So I won't go through that again, but just to remind you, it's a major center for science and technology for research across the board, a very wide-ranging important components, elements of aging and longevity that is designed both to extend the period of healthy lifespan, preventing or forestalling age-related diseases, and guiding the impact of longevity technology on society, because the impact is going to be very profound in society. We have 6 major research areas. We have grown since this series started by another 4 or so research groups. So we're up to 43 research groups, about 400 affiliated researchers in the Center for Aging and Longevity Studies here at UCSB. This lecture series covers only 6 of those 43 groups, so you're just getting a sampling this time. The center, as you can see by these different, quite wide-ranging research areas, spans biomedicine at its core, also engineering, computer science, chemistry, physics, psychology, economics, actuarial science, and wide range across social sciences and the humanities. And I think for those of you who've gone to several of these lectures, you'll see that wide range of impact that the center is having. We're really excited to have such a broad interdisciplinary range of people who are very excited about focusing on the issues of aging and longevity. We also have state-of-the-art facilities. We're very happy to say in the last year, we've got a total of $32 million of grants to build these facilities out that are making very high throughput discoveries in this area. And we've also we're in the process of developing a clearinghouse of reliable information for the public. We're going to be going public with this probably in the fall. It's going to be a website available to everyone that will provide information allowing all of you to make informed decisions based on scientific evidence about measures for improving healthy aging. So please keep your eyes open for that if you're interested. Okay, and now I just want to, I'll turn this over. Oh, Greg is here. Okay, great. I'm going to turn this over to Greg Wilson, the chair of anthropology, who will be introducing tonight's speaker. But I do want to just say a couple of personal words about Mike Gurven. Mike, I really want to express special thanks to Mike because he has shown tremendous dedication and service to CALS. As much as any faculty member in the center I can think of. He's been involved since the inception and helped formulate the inception of the center. He's been engaged in all of the events we do, helped host speakers, and has really been an important contributor to the center. So with that, let me turn it over to Greg Wilson, who will introduce our speaker. Mike.
Thank you, Joel. I'm Greg Wilson, and I'm the chair of the Department of Anthropology here at UCSB, where I've been Mike's colleague for almost 20 years now. And if my introduction today goes long, it's only because Mike's had a very productive career, and he's paid me a fair amount of money to say nice things about it. But seriously, it's my honor today to introduce distinguished Professor Michael Gurven. Dr. Gurven is a biocultural anthropologist who has contributed to major advances in our understanding of human behavior, health, physiology, and culture. His multidisciplinary research program brings together anthropology, behavioral biology, demography, human biology, ecology, economics, medicine, and public health to explore how human health and life history are intertwined within human sociality. He founded and co-directs the Samani Health and Life History Project, a continuously operating National Institute of Health-funded longitudinal study of physical and social aging among Bolivian Amerindians. Truly, Dr. Gurven's holistic approach to human aging and longevity is unprecedented, spanning genes, organs, bodies, and villages. Over his career, he has published more than 260 papers, making all of us, the rest of us, look pretty bad, in many very high-ranking journals. His forthcoming book, 7 Decades, How We Evolved to Live Longer, masterfully weaves empirical and theoretical threads together with findings from years of his collaborative fieldwork. In doing so, he demonstrates how modern lifestyles may be mismatched to current industrialized environments, helping us to understand why chronic diseases like heart disease, cancer, and dementia are rare among people like the Samani, but so common in contemporary urbanized societies. As part of his Samani Health and Life History Project, roughly 4,000 people from 95 villages receive free primary health care annually for a wide range of common ailments. He's also helped coordinate that hundreds of patients receive treatment and surgery for serious conditions. The project also provides educational workshops on disease prevention and detection, donates medical equipment to local hospitals, provides training to Bolivian personnel, and acts as a consultant for tribal governments on healthcare needs. Please join me in welcoming distinguished Professor Dr. Mike Gurven.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Joel. Thanks, Nicole. I think you kind of gave my talk. So mine will only be about 2 minutes. Thanks to all the other organizers of this event, and of course, all of you for spending your evening to hear about some of my work on health and aging. So I'm here to show you another side of the kinds of research being done under the CALS umbrella, more on the social sciences side, but really showing how social and life sciences working together are a powerful and unique combination, something that doesn't really exist in most other aging centers. So, all right, imagine a world where people, say age 65 and older, could live mostly free of heart disease, free of diabetes, and free of Alzheimer's disease, where they could live in a vibrant community where people of all ages commingle, and with limited retirement, still participating in many activities involved in daily affairs. Now, this isn't really a fictional Shangri-La, but it's one of a world I've kind of been privileged to experience and study over the past 2 decades. So, but before I go there, let me step back and just give a little background to orient you all. So while we're used to thinking about the increases in survival that we've experienced with cleaning up the water supply, our public health infrastructure, the germ theory of disease, let me introduce a question that forces us to think a little differently about our modern progress. Does our modern lifestyle and the urban environments we inhabit, and in many ways have created, somehow make us ill, or at least sicker than we might be otherwise? In other words, is there an evolutionary mismatch between our genome, which evolved under conditions of the past, and the very different conditions we find ourselves in today? This is an old idea, but was first proposed in its modern form in a prominent paper in the late 80s, asking basically, are we essentially Stone Agers in the fast lane? So you might be wondering, why is he talking about our ancestral past? What does that really have to do with the present? So let me remind everyone, we've been hunter-gatherers and small-scale farmers for essentially the vast majority of our existence as a species. So for most of our past 150 to 250,000 years that we've existed as Homo sapiens, we've been hunter-gatherers. So to put that in perspective, that's a big number. If all of human existence were mapped across a single calendar year, everything that we're familiar with, how we live our lives today, would be squeezed into the last day of the last month of the year. Domesticating plants and animals, we only see that by about 6 a.m. Growth of cities by 3 p.m. on that last day of the last month. And industrialization, we wouldn't even get to until just shy of midnight at 11:40 p.m. So we've been hunter-gatherers and farmers for most of our species' existence, yet almost everything we know about health and aging are in urban contexts of the global north, a small swath of humanity's experience. So one strong message I hope to convey to you all is that there's a wealth of opportunity that we're missing about health and about aging for everyone, including ourselves, if we just limit ourselves to studying just ourselves. So it's under a hunting and gathering lifestyle where many of our complex adaptations evolve, not just those in our bodies, but also our brains and our emotions and even our social preferences. These here are the Ache of Paraguay, these were full-time hunter-gatherers up until the 1970s. And I was very lucky to do my PhD dissertation working with the Ache in the late 1990s. And spending time with the Ache, so these are people whose life ways come the closest for how we used to live. It really was a life-changing experience for me. Got me hooked. And I'd be lying if a good part of me didn't have that gut feeling that somehow here, the human condition was likely to be more clearly drawn than in other kinds of societies. So I want to point out, though, contemporary hunter-gatherers and farmers, they're not living fossils, right? They inhabit the contemporary world, but they offer us the closest glimpse of what health and aging might have looked like in the pre-industrial past. And so they can offer alternatives for how health and aging could also look in the present. So these are indigenous populations living in the forests, in the savannas, in the deserts, throughout Africa, South America, Southeast Asia. And in these populations, first thing to recognize, life expectancies tend to be shorter than what we're used to because death rates are high during infancy and early childhood. But having studied birth rates and death rates, the nuts and bolts of demography, in many of these populations that lack all the modern amenities that we have, we now know that many people who make it to adulthood will survive to older age. And old age is not just a recent phenomenon. So while conditions may be harsh by certain standards, many of the pervasive chronic diseases of aging are absent in these groups, and not just because they don't live long enough to experience them. So there's a variety of different groups that my friends and colleagues are working with today. So let me give the quick summary of this talk in case you're already eager, for this to be over. I'd like to give it all up front. Although Greg gave 90% of it, but so non-industrialized populations provide a unique lens on aging and longevity. It's kind of like the big point. And the potential for long life, it's built into our biology. Indeed, our human body is built to last at least about 7 decades, even among remote hunter-gatherers lacking healthcare. Now, good for us, we've extended that modal lifespan by about 10 to 20 years in the modern world. What we've learned also from studying these populations is that some of the most devastating aging-related chronic diseases are preventable, and that a healthy lifespan at the population level even is possible without the need for regenerative medicine. That's not to say we shouldn't be doing that. It's just kind of a separate issue from that. And then lastly, what I hope to get to, I think we can gain some insights that will help us rethink our so-called third age of elderhood, where a goal is usually, to add years to life, but we can think about adding life to years. All right, further orient you all a bit. So for the past 26 years, I've been working with a group in the Bolivian Amazon called the Chimane, and they're what's called foraging horticulturalists, inhabiting the lowlands of central Bolivia. So that means they hunt, they fish, they gather fruits and honey, and they farm. Mostly plantains, also corn and rice. And by small-scale society standards, they're actually pretty numerous. There's about 17,000 people living in over 90 villages. So that means if we're interested in understanding something about life, say after age 40, there's over at least 3,000 people that you could study. So this was one of the main reasons that I chose to work there. Plus, people are very friendly and welcoming, and some of the villages lie along a gradient of acculturation. Each of these little circles is a different village, size of the circle, kind of reflecting how many people live there. So not only is it interesting to compare a group like the Chimane to, say, Americans, but the variation among the Chimane acts like a sort of natural experiment, seeing how changing life ways can affect health and aging. So in 2002, I started what's now called the Chimane Health and Life History Project, designed to learn what health and aging were like in such a pre-industrial type setting in relation to the physical and social environment. So this project has grown over the years. It really kind of takes a village. It's been binational, so Bolivia and the US, included, and mostly a lot of, on the day-to-day, there's a roving biomedical anthropological team consisting of Bolivian physicians who we employ, who do medical checkups and provide free healthcare, with biochemists and other lab techs who point of care lab work, aids and diagnoses, and also Chimane, who are trained as social scientists, and of course, vital logistics and office support that offer crucial help locally. On the US side, I now have 3 co-directors, and there's been many whose efforts have been vital, including postdocs and graduate students, many of whom are now faculty, and wonderful colleagues from a variety of disciplines on the bottom here, from cardiology, molecular biology, neuropsychology, and radiology. And I'm proud to say all those people that just pulsed, these are all trained here at UCSB. So over the years, we've tried to understand many aspects of physical health and condition in a very kind of holistic but systematic kind of way, spanning across many of our most vital bodily systems, from our muscles and our bones, to our brain, to our heart, our immune system, our metabolism, our kidneys, And so for each of these categories, we've collected many measures called biomarkers. They're like little snapshots that help us evaluate the state and functionality of each system. Now, don't look too closely at all these variables, all these biomarkers. This is to give you a sense. What we've attempted to really understand these bodily systems as best as we can under field conditions. Some of these might be recognizable to you because when you go to the doctor and get your checkup, get your blood work, these kinds of measures are done. So from blood pressure, cholesterol, your fasting blood sugar. Others, not so common, but you'll hear about some of those soon, and they can also be insightful. The bold here just means that we've studied these longitudinally. That means more than one measure per person over time. Aging is a longitudinal process. And so if we really want to study it well, we need data collected on the same people over time to best characterize it. So aging certainly affects our entire body, but not necessarily at the same rate in all systems. So there's been some attempts to try to glean a more global measure of aging, and we're in the middle of studying those as well. So this includes measures of biological age, kind of determined by analyzing what are called DNA methylation patterns. So these are changes in how our genes are expressed that occur without changes to the actual DNA sequence. This permits us to estimate biological age through measures of what's called epigenetic age acceleration. We're also in the process of analyzing the whole genome, the many diverse microbes that are in our gut, that is the microbiome, in addition to just having clinical diagnoses from all the Bolivian physicians who, on our project, who see people every couple of years. So we also include a workup of many interviews and surveys designed to understand the larger context of health and aging, from how people make their living, how they share food and labor, their residence patterns, and broader aspects of mental health and well-being. So by now you maybe got the message that we've collected a lot of data, but I'm an anthropologist. You know, what I love is I can tell you stories about each data point. These are real people. And a rarity of this kind of study in this setting is that, as I mentioned, it's longitudinal. So like I mentioned before, that means we follow the same people over time. And in talking about a longitudinal study, what better way to start than with just a couple individual lives? Because each person has their own story. This woman was already a matriarch when I first met her in 2002, with many prominent adult children in the community. She had 7 living adult children, lots of grandchildren. She had about 31 of them at the time. By 2012, when she's 73, her husband had died, but she thrived alongside her extended family. This last photo I took just a year and a half ago, and what's amazing to me, she looks kind of younger than she did about 20 years ago. Her oldest son and daughter-in-law had came back from a distant village to live with her and so to take care of her after her husband died. So she's not just surrounded with kids, she's surrounded by grandkids and many great-grandkids. This man was chief of his village when I first met him. Quiet, good sense of humor, liked by everyone, hard worker. His wife, though, died of uterine cancer shortly after the second photo was taken. He had a rough road after this, but he bounced back. He remarried and had a couple more kids. But you can almost see by the time I saw him in 2023, the toll that all this had taken from him, just looking at photos. All right, so with all that said, what have we actually learned that might be useful or interesting to you? So let's see if I can successfully get through. Oh, is that right? The clock on here? Have I really been talking 29 minutes? Oh, all right. Good. Because I don't think I'm going to go over. Nicole said you will not talk more than 30 minutes. I'm going to do my best. All right. So I just have 4. I've limited it down to 4 findings from our years of study. The first one, the Chimane have minimal atherosclerosis. This is the clogging, narrowing of your arteries. Essentially, no heart disease. And our first glimpse was pretty indirect. We just focused on the risk factors, the easy things to measure, like blood pressure. So high blood pressure was rare, and blood pressure didn't really seem to increase much with age. from then electrocardiograms of about 1,000 people over the age of 40, we only saw one case of atrial fibrillation. So this is the most common arrhythmia of your heart, which can lead to clots, stroke, and heart failure. We also saw no peripheral arterial disease. So that's the atherosclerosis, but in the limbs of your body. But our major insight was gained by going for a more direct measure. So calcification of the arteries that feed oxygen directly to your heart, your coronary arteries. And this was a major, I can give a whole talk just on the logistics of transporting people from remote villages to a distant town where the French government had generously donated a CT scanner. And from analysis of the CT images of the heart, you can kind of score the level of calcification, the plaques, in the coronary arteries. So this coronary artery calcification, or CAC, we found the lowest levels ever reported. Basically, 85% of adults over age 40 had no CAC, no calcified plaques whatsoever. And this is critical because wherever it's been found, CAC accurately predicts heart events like heart attacks and strokes. And so one way of gauging how healthy their coronaries are is to talk about arterial age in reference to the CAC levels that are observed in age-matched Americans. And so by this metric, the Chimane have arteries that are about 2 decades younger than their chronological years. More recently, we've been also looking at the elasticity or the stiffness of the arteries. Again, another major risk factor for cardiovascular disease, also linked to heart attacks, strokes, heart failure, even cognitive impairment. And this is assessed through what's called pulse wave velocity, basically the speed at which a pressure wave travels from the carotid artery in your neck to the femoral artery in your leg. A higher value means more stiffness. And again, we found that the Chimane have very elastic arteries, more so than in other populations with comparable data, though the elasticity does decrease a little bit after age 7. So when these studies first came out, they made a big splash in the news circuit, especially the health news circuit. Lots of people had their pet idea about why the Chimane hearts might be so healthy. Some here, like on the left, Dr. Axe, who I've never met, never talked to, don't think he's a doctor, tried to even market the Chimane diet. That's not at all what the Chimane diet is. We had never actually published anything on the Chimane diet at the time. What I do like about this, if nothing else, I can go to my grave knowing that Chuck Norris is a big fan of my work. So if my funding from NIH gets cut, I know where I'm going for support. So, but seriously, my team and I, over the years, we've been trying to figure this all out. So on the dietary side, it's not a paleo meat-only diet. In fact, 2/3 of the calories come from people's fields. They're carbohydrates, but the carbs are complex and they're rich in fiber. Very little saturated fat in the diet, minimal processed foods. Some people grow their own tobacco, but compared to many countries, including our own, cigarette smoking is not that common. But what is common is physical activity, and not leisure or exercise or the kind of weekend warrior going on a hike, but still sitting at a desk all week, which I admit I'm guilty of. So from accelerometers that the Chimane wore on their waists and their wrists, we know that they average about, anyone want to take a guess? How many steps per day? Well, I'm hearing, all right. Yes, about 17,000 steps per day. So whoever said 18 was really close. And that's an average. There's some who are, the young guys in their 20s and 30s are doing like 20, 25. But even adults over age 60 are getting close to 15,000 steps per day. So that's about 3 times more physical activity than your average American is getting. So people are physically active, though, from their just daily activities. But what's instructive here, don't get frustrated and be like, oh, but I can't be a hunter-gatherer. It's not vigorous activity that's so common. People aren't spending all their time just chasing bears down the 101. Too soon, probably, right? It's mostly light to moderate activity that's really common. So people don't spend that much time on average being sedentary. That's sort of the gist. And so these three aspects alone might help explain much of the Chimane's healthy parts. The low bad cholesterol that they have is about 70, their average. The low blood pressure they have, the low morning blood sugar, that basically means no diabetes, and their relatively low levels of obesity. But there's some other factors at play here as well. Minimal industrial air pollutants, perhaps, but also the potential protective effects of intestinal worms. So this is the ick part of the talk. But it's also the part that's kind of the most surprising and new. We all kind of knew that we need to eat well, not smoke, and be physically active. So this part is a little bit new. And from our work and that of others, worms or helminths, as they're called in the intestines, they're largely tolerated by our bodies. And while they can hinder growth early in life and promote anemia in some cases, we found that they also help improve Chimane cardiovascular health. They lead to lower blood cholesterol levels, lower blood sugar, and they help regulate immune function by dampening inflammation and promoting the regulatory arms of the immune system. So in combination, all these factors seem to lead to this healthy heart, the no or minimal CAC that we've seen throughout most of life. All right, take a breath. Number two, Chimane now don't only have healthy hearts, they have healthy brains. They have slower brain aging. So here, this is Chimane brain volume by age, compared to two European samples collected using same methods. Now, though this is cross-sectional, the rate of brain atrophy appears to be lower amongst the Chimane. It's shallower slope than we see in other populations. But they also have not just lower rates of brain atrophy, but lower rates of dementia, especially Alzheimer's disease. So this here is showing the prevalence standardized for the different age composition, but for older adults compared to other populations. And you might imagine it's kind of difficult to diagnose something complex like dementia in a very different population context like that of the Chimane, which is probably why there hasn't been any other study that I'm aware of that has looked at this in a non-industrial population like the Chimane. So in order to accomplish this, just to give you a sense, we had an elaborate battery of neurological tests, cognitive tasks, memory tests, plus interviews with family members, all adapted to the local context and language, done in collaboration with experts at University of Southern California who diagnose and manage dementia cases on a daily basis. We've now completed just several more waves of clinical diagnoses, and so we're really soon going to have something interesting to say about how people live once they have dementia and mild cognitive impairment in these populations. So stay tuned for more. All right, number three, so apolipoprotein E, or ApoE. Some of you might have heard of it because it's the strongest single genetic predictor of Alzheimer's disease that we know of. So the E4 allele in particular is the risky one. E3 is the safer one. So if you have one E4 allele, that increases your risk of getting Alzheimer's by about fourfold. And if you have two E4 alleles, there's a greater than a coin flip chance that you will get Alzheimer's disease by your 80s. So it's also associated with higher blood cholesterol, higher risk of coronary heart disease. So everything that you may have heard, and I've just said about this gene, is its association with bad things happening to you. So that kind of raises this big question, right? Like, why is the E4 allele still with us today? Why hasn't natural selection done its job and eliminated it from the gene pool? From an evolutionary perspective, we might expect that E4 isn't just all harm. Perhaps it yields some benefits, but maybe just not in the mismatched environment we find ourselves in today. So first, a few studies in Brazil have found that E4 carriers show better clearance of certain bacterial and viral infections in early childhood. So this makes a huge difference for survival. So this raised the suspicion that maybe it's the high infection context where we might see some potential benefits of the E4 allele. So far we've found three types of benefits in our work. First, while E4 carriers as a whole performed worse on a battery of those memory and cognitive tests, amongst those who were infected with worms, the E4 carriers actually did much better than the E3 carriers. Second, like elsewhere, we see higher blood cholesterol levels in E4 carriers. Now, we tend to think that's bad, but in this context, it's probably a good thing in a food and energy limited kind of environment. So it's not placing them at a problematically high level, but it is putting them up a notch, which can probably make a difference for growth and reproduction. Which takes me to the next benefit. And this one's a big one for biological fitness. A woman with one E4 allele had on average a half extra child. So it's an average, right? It's not literally a half a child being born, but on average, one half extra child. Those with two E4 alleles had just over 2 extra children. That's a big difference in fertility. And we found that it comes about from earlier onset of reproduction and shorter spacing between births. So taken together, these findings suggest that what we think of as a harmful allele in our modern world may have positive effects in more traditional environments. And if they improve survival or fertility in those settings, that might help explain why E4 isn't going away anytime soon. Genes have different effects in different environments. But again, we'd never know this if we only looked at how E4 works in current urban Western contexts. Okay, the last one. So we've seen so far that Chimani have healthy hearts, healthy brains, but a broader level of biological age, it's unclear whether Chimani are kind of really healthier than their age-matched American counterparts. So one metric, called here DM, it's a composite of many of the biomarkers I showed you before on the figure of the bodily systems. So the idea here is that instead of just assessing your condition based on 1 or 2 variables, imagine using information from 40 variables and compiling that information together, both their levels, but also how they associate with each other, and see how all that changes with age, especially when you contrast that to what all that looks like in healthy people. And this can give us a sense of what's been called physiological dysregulation. And preliminary work here seems to show that dysregulation increases with age. As you can see here, each one of those little lines is an individual person longitudinally over time. And it's all increasing. And the rate of increase seems to be similar to what we see in Canadians and Europeans, where we can make the kind of similar comparisons. Now, I mentioned, whoops, I went too far. I mentioned epigenetic age before as another metric of biological age, and here preliminary work is more equivocal. So by one holistic metric of epigenetic age, the Chimani seem to be younger than, say, US whites and Hispanics, but by another metric that mostly corresponds to like their immune system age, the Chimani are older than their years. You see this little red bar being higher there. So we have a much bigger sample now and more up-to-date epigenetic measures, so we'll learn more soon. But this pattern, if it holds, it seems to jive with these observations that Chimani adults can walk through the tangled forest for 10 miles and chop trees for hours, but at the same time, they also die from a variety of infections, including pneumonias, tuberculosis, and other respiratory conditions. All right, so taken together, we're learning some exciting things. I hope you find them exciting, but it's still a work in progress. We're trying to better understand the separate and joint effects of major factors from diet, physical activity, infection, genetics, the gut microbiome, also social connection, which I'll come back to in a minute. And we're trying to understand those effects on aging writ large, but also on the specific diseases of aging that I already mentioned, which seem to operate, through these different pathways and often involve our immune systems, our metabolism, and our vascular system. All right, are there more take-home messages that hit even closer to home? So many people ask me, how can we gain extra years of life, even better if it's good life? And first, some of the same things that make Chimani healthy are what make us healthy and live longer. But now I think we can have a greater appreciation perhaps for why. So in a recent study just last year, analyzing the lifespan of almost 1 million US veterans tracked over 2 decades, 8 habits were found basically that had the largest effect on adding extra years to life. Those 8 habits, physical activity had the biggest effect, increasing survival by 46%. Don't get addicted to opioids. Always good advice. Don't smoke. But also manage your stress well. Eat a healthy diet, more whole foods, more plant-based. Try to avoid regular binge drinking. Have a good night's sleep. Oh yeah, and have some, positive, healthy social relationships. All that leads to living longer. And taken together, if you're 40 years old and you went from doing none of those things to doing all 8 of them, you would gain an expected 20 to 24 extra years of life. Now, the gain is less if you're already doing some of those, but even if you're only doing half of them, and then you'd still gain about a decade from doing the rest. Now, the benefits also diminish the later you start, but it's never too late to start. So going from doing nothing to just 4 at age 80 still adds, sorry, this pointer's not working, but it still adds about 4 extra years. That's a lot. And so, whoops. So the key then is not just to think of each of these like medications or treatment for a longer life, rather just to adopt these as part of a lifestyle so that they become actual habits. The Chimani, they don't exercise. The thought of exercise is kind of funny to them when I tell them about it. They walk and just move their bodies just to get food and to socialize. So a lot of this talked about adding more years to life, but what about, I did promise I would say something about adding life to years. And this is what I'm working on now, and I'm really excited about this. I'm interested in the quality of those later years. Are people happy? Do they feel a sense of belonging? Do they feel connected to others, both in their family, but also in their larger communities? And despite high average level of social embeddedness, do we still see evidence of social isolation, loneliness? We're in a loneliness epidemic currently. Do people feel that their lives have purpose and have meaning? Is food and caregiving readily available when it's needed? And importantly, now that modernizing influences like schools, self-service and smartphones, markets, loggers, some colonists, all that's kind of changing the landscape now. How's that going to change the health and well-being of the elder population? So over the past few years, my team and I have been conducting lots of interviews, focus group interviews, even just straight up observation throughout the day to get a detailed sense of all these aspects. And I hope the next time I talk to you, I can speak more about that exciting new area. But one thing that's clear, I'll say, living in multi-generational communities surrounded by family and neighbors is key to people's well-being and their physical health. There's no notion of formal retirement at, say, a magic age, like 65 or any other age for that matter. People continue working to the extent possible, but they also shift how they spend their time, taking on different roles as educators, as babysitters, as storytellers, which remember, in the absence of books, TV, Google, that's priceless. They're also conflict mediators, leaders, cultural experts with a lifetime of experience. All right, so what I will leave you with, this is hot off the press. I actually did this earlier today, but I think it speaks for itself. 9 out of 10 Chimani adults over the age of 55 say they feel a strong sense of belonging in their family and in their community. And just under half say their lives are consistently filled with much meaning and purpose. Over half say, some of the time, but only 4% said they felt that their lives had no meaning or purpose. All right, I lied. This is actually my last slide. And it's awkward because this is, I think, the first plug I've ever made. So it's a gentle plug. I have a lot more to say, but since taking the 30 minutes, I'm really happy to announce I finally wrote a book. And it's for a broad audience. It's called 7 Decades, How We Evolved to Live Longer. It expands on a lot of things I talked about today, but it goes into much more detail. So look for it in September. Thank you so much for your attention. Should I pick on Robert?
Thank you, that's wonderful. I have a question, so how much of these benefits could be that you just killed off the people when they were young, that might not have lived so long? You understand my question?
Yeah, so, I mean, if you're talking about, it's often called mortality selection, right? Well, it manifests in a couple ways, right? If I only went there once and I said, look, no heart disease. Well, imagine if there is heart disease, but you don't live very long with it, right? But we've been there over 20 years and we're doing epidemiological studies. In fact, even in the electrocardiograms, we saw one case of a mild silent infarct. So we know that people aren't dying of heart disease. They're not dying of dementia. And so we've got even some of those curves that showed like those rates, you can sort of do the analysis like, what about the people who died throughout the study? And even when you take that into account, the differences between populations are still there. And on the other level, you can say, well, what about those people who died early in life, like in the first 10 years? And that's possible, but what people are dying at in all ages tends to be more infection, right? And so there has to be an argument that, whatever they were dying of is changing in the genetic representation, perhaps in the later population. And from what we've looked at so far, we don't see a whole lot of evidence of that. And what we do know, of course, that just other Amerindian groups who are, not the same exactly as the Chimane, but are closer genetically to the Chimane than they are to us. As soon as they move into towns and cities and change their lifestyles, everything is changing so rapidly. So I don't think it's going to be a magic gene. I don't think it's going to be just because those folks, only the robust are the ones who are surviving, because even at those earlier ages, they're healthier than age-matched folks at all ages. Yeah.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
First, what is Somali? Is there a meaning behind that name?
Yeah, good question. So kind of like a lot of groups, like Ache means, the kind of the real people. In fact, any of you drink Guayaki, yerba mate? No one's ever heard of it? So Guayaki is actually a pejorative name for the Ache. So, shame on them. But because the Ache actually picks some of the yerba mate leaves. And Ache kind of means the true people. And the Chimane also, when you ask people, it's like, it just means people, it means us. So it doesn't really translate as like any other kind of meaning other than that, yeah.
So my other question was language.
Yeah.
What kind of language do they speak and how do you use them?
Yes, so they speak their own language called Chimane, coincidentally. Increasingly, younger people are learning Spanish. And so that makes things a little bit easier, but I've been working there off and on for over 2 decades. So, I kind of learned the hard way. In fact, there was a point in which my Chimane language was better than my Spanish. Now, there's not that many people I can practice with, but talk about a crazy world we live in. 2 or 3 hours ago, I was literally just talking to people in the jungle, in Chimane language, using WhatsApp, because now there's reception. So now I do have the ability to talk more. So yeah, I kind of had to learn it on my own. And I would say, I'm decent, but I'm not fluent by any means. It's a hard language. It's unrelated to Spanish. It's unrelated to the major languages even in Bolivia, which is Quechua, Aymara, the Highland languages. It's sort of an isolate. Only like one other group has a similar language.
Thank you. Early in your presentation, one of your graphics showed the word lifespan, and next to it in parentheses, it showed the word health span. Can you explain the interrelationship between those two words? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, so it's an important concept, right? You know, lifespan is just referring to actual kind of number of extra years and how long we live, and health span, this notion of healthy years, right? And so often you'll hear talk about the gap between health span and lifespan. And of course, in an ideal world, that gap is zero, right? And that's kind of the goal, right? We don't just want to extend out life, we want to extend out health span. Now, the good news, and I think Joel mentioned this in his talk, if you saw the first one, in general, when you increase lifespan, you are also increasing health span. It's like marking a band on a rubber band and then stretching it out. It's kind of moving to the right as well. The bad news is that the gap hasn't changed a whole lot. As we've increased lifespan, the gap with health span and lifespan is still there. And health span is a little bit trickier to measure because there's some subjectivity involved. Lifespan is kind of easy. People are alive or they're dead. Health span requires like how do you defining what it means to be healthy. But yeah, sure. There wasn't, yeah, one in the front.
Medical conditions, how does that affect or skew your findings?
There's always someone who asks the Star Trek, the prime directive question, right? And it's a good question. In fact, it's the reason I got my first grant rejected by NSF, which I was surprised because it was about anthropology. I thought, what am I supposed to do? Diagnose people and be like, thank you, and then move on when people are getting sick of easily preventable things. So, you know, on one level, we are having an impact, but, you know, how big of an impact are we having? Well, notice what I haven't really done is like using life or death as an outcome. So we're kind of using metrics that probably we're having less impact. Like, I'm not having a big impact on people's cholesterol levels, right? And if I am, for certain things, like we're having an impact, we're seeing and diagnosing people before we treat them. And if we're treating them with acute infection, there's a really good chance 3 months later they're getting another infection and we don't come back again for like a year or two. And so, you know, on some level, I think those effects are having a small cumulative toll, but isn't completely throwing our results. Our intervention is not the reason why there's like no calcification in the coronary arteries. But there are some other things that I would probably, if you press me, we are probably having an impact on them. You know, snake bites, deaths from snake bites have gone down, right? Because we have antivenom, getting people to the hospital for emergencies has changed. So yeah, and if I have to impact certain things, I'm going to do that because I mean, ethically, I don't see how we can operate otherwise. And it's part of the reason why I've been able to work there for over 2 decades. There's no way you can be able to work in a place like this. You can get away with anything like 1 or 2 years, but what's the value to the community of our presence there? And so it's been a nice kind of collaborative enterprise. In fact, the Chimani are really proud that they have healthy hearts, right? I mean, this was something that they never even occurred to them, that they have something that's going good for them compared to the rest of the world. So, yeah. Oh, okay, yes.
Wow. Two-part question. So I'm seeing that as I'm looking at what you're doing, and I'm trying to take a look at what Dan Buettner did with the blue zones. Out of all of the groups that you studied and all of the things that they did, community seemed to be one of the most important things, and that was like one of your last slides, that like these people are really into their community. So the first question is could that be like the #1 thing that a lot of other people are doing? And even though you're not studying somebody in Asia or Canada or whatever, do you think that that might be something that could be this worldwide thing? Is that if you can keep the community together, which is what a lot of people are trying to do here in the United States now, are you going to have as big of an impact as somebody who's doing VO2 max testing on somebody every year at the Cooper Clinic?
Yes, great question. Dan Buettner used to be a local here. He moved back to Minnesota. So yeah, I'm quite familiar with the blue zones, and I agree. And the way I kind of presented this was like, I'm not just only interested in the biology, here's something about their social life. But of course, the big picture is putting it all together. I actually think, and we'll be able to actually measure, does feeling lonely, when you're competing against 2,000 extra steps per day versus, just hanging out with other people, and even better, if you're gonna get those extra steps, do it with other people, right? Like that kind of combined approach. I'm not sure how it's gonna play out. I do think the social community, the social aspects are really important. Now, if it turns out that there's not a whole lot of variability in the population, if everyone is fairly social and you don't have people who are kind of living isolated, or if the ones who are living isolated, it's because no one wants to be near them, right? There's a good reason for it. It's not randomized treatment. We're not taking people and like moving them. So it's a little bit hard to do some things observationally, right? Without experiments. Yeah, it's unclear. I actually do think we're actually going to see a signature of the socializing and the extent to which people feel a part of their community. And, a big part of it is just also the value that others have of you. So to put it in kind of crude terms, are you useful? Are you making yourself useful? And, that's a big part of just your own self-esteem. And in these societies, people are still useful to their families and to their communities. Even if they're not like out there still actively hunting and gathering, they're still doing some of these other tasks. Now, I've kind of given the positive side. There is a point at which you become maybe more of a burden than as an asset. And there, I do think you do see some of the same things that you would see here with frailty and with social isolation. Even though you're embedded in the community, all of a sudden people are sort of disinvesting in you. They're not showing up as much. You're the last one to get food when there's a feast, that kind of thing. So I do think, yeah, the social aspects are critical and important. And now that, our own Attorney General, Surgeon General is making this a public health issue, right? It's not just, oh, loneliness is bad because it makes us feel bad, but, the metric you always hear, being lonely is like the equivalent of, smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And once you put that in the same kind of metric, because putting it in the same kind of model, then I think we can think more clearly about those things and interventions that affect sociality, not just eating the right food and moving your body the right way.
I think we have time for one more question. I'll let you two wrap up.
Who had their hand up the longest? Who had the best question? You have the best question? All right.
So the reference to Dan Greener's work is appropriate because he studied patients with great longevity and great quality of life. But the average age of death, as I understand it, in the community are 53. And I don't understand how the lessons that you've extracted apply to American culture or Western culture. Because even though the leading causes of death are cardiovascular, the reason that we have an accelerated and late, even now, late 70s, early 80s, age of mortality is in fact because of cardiovascular advances and the prevention of infection, COVID is a dip. So the questions are, first, how is it that the Somali die? And second, is that if it's because of infection, as it commonly is, I think, because of pneumonia disease, would Western interventions like antibacterial and antibiotics be helpful in extending that longevity? And then thirdly, do they have any kind of compressed morbidity as centenarians do in the United States and elsewhere around the world? That is that they live a great lifespan at a very short period of illness.
That was a good one. Yes, so the first point, someone, you did your homework, you got the 53 number. But so actually, from the 50s up to the late 80s, the life expectancy was in the low 40s. Then just even from the 90s and early 2000s, that life expectancy went up to the low 50s. Probably by now, I'm in the process of trying to update it. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in the mid 50s, maybe even a little bit higher. And the reason why, well, is there still something to learn? Isn't the case if they're not longevous, then what's the point? And again, the thing is that the reason why these differences between how we define lifespan, and that's kind of the point of the book 7 Decades. Part of the title comes from the observation that, where are you getting a clear glimpse of what the potential for life could be? And the infant and more early child mortality that's really high is what drags those averages low. And when you look past that point, you see this kind of mountain of deaths around about 7 decades in every small scale subsistence population and throughout history where we have good life table information. Life expectancies could be 32, 33, but you still see this mountain of lifespans that tend to be around 6 to 7 decades. And so if you've made it to those later ages, what can we learn from your health? I think there are important lessons there for maintaining health, and this is an important point. It was a little bit more complex. I didn't kind of get into it, but it's true. The Chimane have a higher chance of dying at every age of their life compared to us. So on one level, we're doing pretty darn good, right? It's a privilege, a luxury to actually have some of these chronic diseases of aging, because the big difference with Chimane and us, first of all, is that many more of us reach that mountain, and that mountain itself has shifted from about 7 decades to 8 to 9 decades in US and other kind of longevous populations. So I think that kind of gives us important lessons. And it is true, I guess that the ideal would be, is there a sweet spot where you could actually have antibiotics and all the modern amenities that improve our lives most, but also savor some of those aspects that still allow you to prevent some of the chronic diseases of aging. It's not inevitable that if you just extend the life, then you're all of a sudden going to see atherosclerosis and those other things. I mean, we know that at the individual level, there's pockets of people who live just like the Chimane and have really healthy hearts and healthy brains. But the big difference here is that it's really at like a population level, not just, Earl, who is, a triathlete and eats well and has the best social life and all that stuff. There might have been a second part, but now I can't remember. Oh, the compressed morbidity. Let me talk with you about that afterwards. That's a bit more complex. Yeah, I'm out of time.
So please join me in thanking my husband